being Jewish. I mostly love Jews, but I love being Jewish. I love institutions of Jewishness, like synagogues and summer camps and campus hillels. I love the way Judaism draws my attention to the flow of the calendar year. Shabbat each week, fall Chagim in their season, Tisha B'Av tonight. I love the languages of Jewishness, Hebrew and Yiddish and Ladino and Judeo-Arabic. Even when I don't understand them, I love the fact of them. I love the mitzvot, the way halacha leads me along a path toward a better me and a fuller we. I love God, the Jewish God. I know that's not always fashionable, but I do. And I hate the gods imposed on us by those who incarcerate God in their metaphors. I love Judaism. I hate idolatry. I love being Jewish. I love Jewish humor, Jewish podcasts, feeble attempts in Jewish publications at quote-unquote Jewish angles to Goyish stories. I'm almost always annoyed to tears by the end of these stories, but I love that we want desperately to find ourselves in them, to see ourselves in the world. As Rabbi Lionel Blue has said, Jews are like everyone else, but more so. I love Torah. I love learning. I love that being Jewish means that I should love these things. And I love Israel. I love the history of the land, our history with the land, the people of Israel, even the ones who despise me on some level, I love them. I revel in the fact of Jewish sovereignty in our ancient homeland, even as I am deeply unsettled by the ways power exercised by collective Jewish hands so closely resembles power exercised collectively by other human hands. David Ben-Gurion once quipped, "We will know we have become a normal country when Jewish thieves and Jewish prostitutes conduct their business in Hebrew." They have, and they do, and that makes me sad and angry because the victory of normality is the defeat of excellence, and I love that Jews want to be better even when we're not. Which brings me to this Shabbat Chazon and to Tisha B'Av, because each year I feel a sort of ambivalence about this observance, at least as it relates to the events within the Promised Land. Allow me to tease these things apart for us. Part of me is ambivalent for what I call party line Zionist reasons. How can we mourn the destruction of the temple, the leveling of Jerusalem, the expulsion of our people, when Medinat Yisrael is the extant nation state of the Jews, while Jerusalem flourishes as its capital? When we have seen with our own eyes the ingathering of the exiles? How indeed? But I also feel ambivalent in the way I feel ambivalent about Yom Yerushalayim, the anniversary of Jerusalem's reunification. Truthfully, I used to feel ambivalent about that day. Now I feel something akin to revulsion, as ultra-nationalist forces have increasingly laid claim to the day, leaving little room for even nostalgic remembrances of 1967 or photographs of paratroopers at the Kotel, let alone centuries of tears shed at and about what was then called the Wailing Wall. In other words, my ambivalence about Tisha B'Av is rooted in the fact of the modern, not in the fact of the modern state, but in how the state goes about exercising its authority. On Shabbat Chazon, on Tisha B'Av, I ask, how can I mourn when my love is so big? When the prayers from our ancient Siddur have literally been answered in my lifetime, and I ask, how do I love? What is the nature of my love, the timbre of my love? When the place that I love and the people within that place break my heart and win my heart again and again and again and again. You may have noticed that I keep using the word how. So it makes complete sense to me that the first word of Lamentations that we'll hear tonight is Echa. What does Echa mean? Sometimes we see it translated as alas, But that's not really what it means. As Yechiel Tzvi Moskowitz writes in his commentary, Echat hitzura marechet shel eich. Echa is an elongated form of eich, which means how. It's a question word, he says, that comes to express tsa'ara, pain. The Midrash seems to reinforce this point and brings the dispute between two rabbis, Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah. Rabbi Nehemiah says, Eicha is about grief, kina'ah, lamentation, as in the book we read tonight, 3 of the 5 chapters of which begin with the word Eicha. How could this happen to us? Rabbi Yehuda, I think it's Yehuda, but I really want to say Yoda every time I see it, but I think it's Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says, Eicha is about tochacha, rebuke, which is to say, how could we let this happen? How did we enable this? That's the tension, I think, at the heart of Tisha B'Av. Eicha, how do we sit at the nexus of self-awareness and self-defeatism? What is critique of one's community without falling into the trap of victim blaming? How can we mourn what was done to us even as we mourn what might have been done by us or by others in our name? These are not easy questions to answer, but our tradition doesn't shy away from them either. Eichas, hows, are abundant on this Shabbat as tribbles. They seem to multiply left and right. We've already said that tonight's Megillah includes 3 chapters that begin with Eicha, but today's Haftarah, too, that you heard, features the word. Eicha hayta lezonah, you heard Abby chant. How has the faithful city become a harlot? She that was full of justice, righteousness lodged in her, but now murderers. Today has, as I said, a special designation, Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. What is Isaiah's vision? It ain't sunshine and roses, at least not in chapter 1. But Eicha appears not just in the prophetic reading, it's there every year on Shabbat Chazon in the Parsha. Moshe is recounting the past 40 years of wandering, of trials and tribulations. He acknowledges the growth and thriving of the Jewish people, but also the challenge of managing them. He feels not just a bit overwhelmed and exclaimed, "How can I bear the unaided, the trouble of you, and the burden, and the bickering?" Sometimes I realize why he was called Moshe Rabbeinu. I think all rabbis at some point ask those questions. So Eicha in the Parsha, Eicha in the Haftorah, Eicha in the Megillah tonight. The question of how pervades the waning moments of the 9 days, which points us toward a final question. If how is at best a manifestation of love, what does it mean to ask the question of how from a place of love? If you're like me, how can you go on loving Judaism and Jews and Torah and God and Israel and Jewish food, Jewish jokes, Jewish ways of walking in the world when there are just so many questions? Allow me to conclude not with answers, but with 3 images which may help us point ourselves towards some answers. First of all, the letters Aleph, Yud, Chaf, Hey appear in Torah long before Deuteronomy. They appear in chapter 3 of Genesis. Adam and Chava eat the forbidden fruit, and they're ashamed, and they're hiding from God. And the Torah says, Vayikra Hashem Elohim et ha'adam vayomer lo ayeka. Ayeka is pointed differently, but the letters are the same as Eicha, and as we know, the Torah doesn't have vowels. We usually translate this word Ayeka as where are you? Because God seems to be playing this game of hide and seek. But we could just as easily translate this as Malbim does, where are you not physically, but where are you spiritually? Or not where, but how are you? How could you? Mistakes are part of being human, as we know. The word echa is fundamentally human, to be sure, which is why Ibn Ezra suggests ayeka is the ultimate conversation starter. How, despite this moment, can we still talk? How is relationship possible when trust has been broken? The answer is harder than the question, but Shabbat Chazon isn't really about answers. It's about sitting with those questions, and my friends, it's about love. Which brings me to my second image. The Midrash tells us that the first temple was destroyed because of idolatry, because of the Israelites' failure to remain loyal to God. But the second temple, not so. The second temple, it seems, was destroyed because of something more insidious and unfortunately just as pervasive as idolatry. In 70 CE, the temple was destroyed, we're told, because of sinat chinam, causeless hatred, or better translated, free-flowing hatred. We Jews have trouble loving each other sometimes. In fact, we have more trouble loving each other, I think, than we do loving God. And we definitely love being Jewish more easily than we love our fellow Jews. A lesson of the Churban, the destruction of the temple then, is that when we love a building or a land or even an invisible God more and better than we love one another, catastrophe is often not far behind. That's not prescriptive, it's observational. Echa. How do we move forward together? My final image may point us in a direction, because there is a beautiful tradition from the Yerushalmi, the Palestinian Talmud, that says Tisha B'Av is not just a day of mourning, it's also a day of promise. Who will be born on Tisha B'Av? Mashiach. That's right. According to the Yerushalmi, the Messiah is to be born on the very day when the temple was destroyed. Now, this is both a national and a spiritual claim. The destruction of Jerusalem was the end of the monarchy. The restoration of sovereignty is how the Talmud understands the primary role of Mashiach. He is the anointed one, the rightful heir to the throne. But this is also, and I think more importantly, a spiritual claim, because the seed of redemption, the hope of repair, is embedded in the rubble of our greatest trauma, which means that each Tisha B'Av is not only a chance to grieve what we've lost, but to anticipate all that we can become, to fall in love again and again with being Jewish and what that means for a redeemed world. Harav Kook, the first Ashkenazi chief rabbi of pre-state Palestine, offers a solution to the problem of sinat chinam, of free-flowing hate. The answer, he says, is avat chinam, abundant and generous love. Shabbat Chazon, Tisha B'Av, these are certainly about recognizing hate and crying out Echa. How could this happen? But the vision of Shabbat Chazon, the promise of Tisha B'Av, is love. In this sense, Psalm 137 is the perfect counterpoint to Tisha B'Av. Im eshkachech Yerushalayim tishkachi mini. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. We remember Jerusalem, but we forget this verse is also an answer to a question that comes in the previous verse. What was the question? You'll never guess. Ech nashir et shir Hashem al admat necher. How can we sing a song of the Lord on foreign soil? Ech nashir. How can we sing from this place in Baltimore? How can we mourn when our love is so big? How do we love when the place that we love and the people that we love break our hearts and win our hearts again and again and again? I don't know the answer, but I know that you can't ask how to love best unless you're willing to love at all. Shabbat Shalom.